All right, hello, hello, hello. We are going to get started here in just a couple of seconds. Want to give some few minutes here for people to join us, and very much looking forward to getting it started here. Love this topic of talking about boundaries, so we are going to get going here in a second. All right, so we're going to get started and honor those of you who are here on time. So welcome to the second part of this three-part series, Embrace the Power of Boundaries. And today I'm going to be talking about specific boundaries that introverts need or might need in relationships. And when I'm talking about relationships here, I'm not just talking about like personal relationships or romantic relationships. I'm talking about basically anytime you're engaging with another human. So that could be personally, professionally, it could be friends, family, coworkers, your boss, your neighbors, your the parents of your kids, friends. So any human that you're interacting with, there may be an opportunity there for implementing some boundaries. So when I talk about relationships throughout this talk, that's what I'm talking about. So thank you for being here. Thank you if you are watching the replay. Thank you for watching the replay. If you are here with me live, feel free to drop a comment in just so I know you're here. I'd love to say hi. But otherwise, we're gonna start to get into this. So I am super excited to host this three-part series because I feel like, actually, I know that boundaries are something that I think just in general, regardless of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, boundaries are hard because we are not taught to set boundaries, right? And so that's challenging. And I think for introverts, there's an extra layer of challenge to speaking up and setting boundaries with people in your life. I talked about that last week in part 1. So if you'd like to check that out, be sure to watch that. But when you set boundaries, when you set strong boundaries, that is a key piece of really growing your confidence and taking care of your well-being. Hi, Brianna. So glad you're here, and taking care of your well-being as an introvert. So it's super, super important. And it's a skill that once you learn how to do it is going to serve you well for the rest of your life. So if you are new to me, if this is the first time you're tuning in to one of my talks, one of my weekly LinkedIn Live talks, I'm Vicki Regina, and I am a certified mindset and confidence coach for introverts. And I have spent hundreds of hours working with my introverted clients over the years to support them and to help them to feel more empowered and confident to lean into their introversion so that they can confidently step out of their comfort zone. They can put themselves out there in a way that feels good to them, and they can really begin to thrive on their own terms. And this is something that I'm super, super passionate about. So I love coming on and having these talks each week to help you, if you're an introverted, to understand yourself better and to learn how to speak up for yourself. So I focus exclusively on introverts because I'm a hardcore introvert myself. I like to say I'm a hardcore proud introvert. And I feel like that, well, not feel like, again, I know from talking with my clients and even prospective clients that most introverts feel like just the word introvert is a negative thing. And it's not something that they're like, woohoo, I'm an introvert. So and that always breaks my heart to hear that. So I know that for a lot of introverts, because they tell me this on calls, that they feel like they're at a disadvantage because they're an introvert or their introversion holds them back. And to that, I love to say that your introversion does not hold you back. It is your thoughts, your beliefs, your understanding of what you think introversion is, which is fueled by the collective misunderstanding of what it means to be introverted. That is what's holding you back if you feel like you're held back. Not being an introvert. So you do not need to fix being an introvert. You don't need to overcome being an introvert, but we might need to work on fixing or challenging the beliefs that tell you that you're limited. That's the opportunity. So last week in part 1 of this series on the power of boundaries, I talked about what boundaries are, in case that's something that you're new to. I talked about the importance of having them. I talked about how boundaries contribute to healthy relationships. And again, that could be personally, professionally. I talked about why introverts in particular tend to struggle with setting boundaries. And then if that is you, I also shared 3 tips, 3 strategies that you can start to implement to step out of the fear of setting boundaries so that you can start to actually identify those and set those in your life. So today I'm going to be carrying that conversation forward and talking about specific boundaries that as an introvert you may need in relationships that are in your life, especially if you're in relationships of any sort of variety with extroverts. So I'm going to be talking about the unique traits and needs that introverts have in relationships, because that's going to lay the foundation to start to talk about the specific boundaries that you might need or want to implement into your relationship. So I'm going to be talking about boundaries around personal space and alone time, boundaries around your emotional well-being, and then we will talk about boundaries around social interactions and events. So if you have questions as we're going through this, please drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to get to those before we wrap up the talk. I will say that for today, I have a lot to say, so I apologize if I'm talking super fast because I want to try to get it in, but there is a chance we may go a little bit over the 30 minutes, but not substantially so. But I will leave time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. All right, so let's start out by talking about the unique traits and needs that introverts have in relationships. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to talk about 3 specific areas because these are very important areas to take a look at and see if you may need boundaries around them. So these 3 specific areas are around where we as introverts source our energy. They are around how we as introverts communicate, and then also our preference as introverts for the environments that we're in, like the physical space that we are in. So when we're talking about where we source our energy, and when I'm talking about energy, I'm talking about that internal battery, that the juice that gets us going, that gets us taking action. When we have more energy, we're more clear of mind versus having, like, when we're really low energy, we're kind of like our brain just kind of freezes and we can't think about anything. So that's the type of energy that I'm talking about. So for introverts, we source that energy on the inside. So that's like we need to turn inward to be in our thoughts, to be in our inner world. Introverts have very rich inner worlds. So that is where we source our energy, where we gain more energy and feel more rejuvenated and energized. And so that can be like things like solo activities like reading or journaling, even watching TV. It could be if you have hobbies that you love, and maybe you're very creative. This could be spending time getting lost in getting into the flow of working on those hobbies. It's getting in flow state is really, really good and rejuvenating for introverts. This could be going out for a walk in nature, just around your neighborhood. So anything that allows you to spend time alone, that allows you to slow down and just to experience some quiet, is really, really recharging for introverts. And all of that allows us to activate that. We are biologically wired differently. I did a talk on that several weeks back, but doing those quiet solo things allows us to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is what allows us to feel calm. Introverts have a greater need for activating that's part of our nervous system. So in relationships, it's really important for us to have partners, friends, family members, coworkers, boss, whatever. We need them to understand that we have this need. We need them to respect it, and we need for them to provide us space to engage in some alone time so that we can recharge. Because for introverts, that alone time is like getting a good night's sleep. So it's not selfish. It's just your overall well-being, right? I don't think anybody would say it's selfish to get a good night's sleep, right? So it's also not selfish for us to take that time alone in order to feel rejuvenated and refreshed. Now, when it comes to how we communicate, as introverts, we are excellent listeners. That's one of our most amazing strengths, is that we are excellent listeners, and we prefer more meaningful, deeper conversations. We don't necessarily love the small talk side of things. We tend to excel in one-on-one conversations, and that's because we're internal processors. So we are very thoughtful, we're very reflective, and we need space in conversations to be able to turn inward and think. So introverts need to process their thoughts and think before they speak, so we can put our words together and actually say what we want to say. Extroverts are different. They are more verbal processors. So they are going to they need to talk things out in order for them to collect their thoughts and then be able to share what they want to share. So two very different communication styles. So we need to be aware of that so that we can start to put some boundaries in place to honor those differences so that we don't end up feeling overtalked and dismissed and ignored. So this is really important in relationships to make sure that we have that space so that we can create, harmonious relationships where we both feel, both parties feel understood, they both feel heard, and both people feel like they can fully express themselves. So we need boundaries around having those spaces in our conversation so that we can think without the other people jumping in because they think we're done talking. We need that space. We need space to not have to think on our feet, especially in difficult conversations. So those are all areas that because of our different styles of communication, we just need to be aware of so that we can potentially build in some boundaries around that so that, again, we feel like we can fully express ourselves and be heard and understood and respected. And then finally, the third area where I feel like a lot of introverts need to establish boundaries just because of differences in how we are is in our environment around us. So most introverts tend to prefer a more calm environment. And that is, again, because we have a stronger need to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, and calm environments allow us to do that. So introverts, a lot of times, this isn't the case necessarily for everyone, but introverts do have a tendency to have a more sensitive nervous system. So we are more sensitive to external stimuli. We get more overwhelmed by things going on around us. So things like large social gatherings, lots of noise, lots of things going on around us. Those are all things that can feel overwhelming to us. And we do need those calm environments somewhere at some point so that we can start to recharge and rejuvenate our drained batteries, if you will. So within our relationships, we need partners, friends, family members, coworkers, bosses that understand this and allow us to have that calm space where we can recharge, or maybe if it's at work, where we can work independently and in a quiet space so that we can get in that flow without being distracted in an open office floor plan or something like that. So now that you have a better understanding of your unique needs and traits as an introvert and within relationships, let's talk about some specific boundaries that you might want to implement to help honor and protect those different needs and traits. So we're going to start with personal space and alone time. Now I'm going to take a quick sip of water. So setting boundaries for personal space and alone time, I think, is one of the most essential areas that introverts need to set boundaries around, because our world is very extrovert dominant in terms of how it is designed. So our world is designed to support how extroverts recharge and get their energy. It is not designed to honor how we as introverts get our energy and feel recharged. So that means we as introverts, we have to take ownership of that. We have to stand up and speak on behalf of our own needs so that we ensure that we're getting the space to recharge just like all of the extroverts do. So this is super, super important. So this is, again, introverts need alone time. It's nothing personal to those in our life. It's not that we don't want to spend time with them. We just a lot of times need to spend time with ourselves. So being in a space where you can set boundaries so that you feel that need is respected, that your need for alone time is respected, that can help prevent those feelings of being overwhelmed or exhausted. It can prevent feeling feeling resentment over not being understood. So it's an overall, setting those boundaries is overall just provides overall benefits to your well-being and even your mental health. So some specific examples of boundaries that you might want to implement to honor and protect your need for personal time and alone time is you might want to put something, and these are examples, this is not an exhaustive list, there's going to be more, but these are common ones that I see with my clients that they need. So needing alone time before or after big events, or social events. So that could be maybe there's an all day neighborhood barbecue on a Saturday or something. You might need some time alone on Saturday night or on Sunday to recharge from that. The holidays is a big time where introverts can get overwhelmed. So you might need a little bit more space there on your own to recharge. So there could be, again, communication and talking with your people in your life so that they understand that this is just like getting a good night's sleep for you. You might want to set a boundary around time to get lost in your hobby. So if you have some hobbies that you really love doing, and getting in the flow of working on those allows you to really feel refreshed and recharged, you might want to set a boundary on that. Maybe it's one night a week, or and after, one Saturday a month, whatever it is that works for you and whatever that hobby is, and your personal dynamic. It might be really helpful to establish that so that you, again, can get in that space where you can get into the flow of it and feel fully recharged and rejuvenated. Another example of boundaries that you might want is something like quiet hours. So maybe the first hour of the morning is your time. Nobody can talk to you. Or maybe it's like the last hour before you go to bed. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But there might be an opportunity to set some boundaries around creating some quiet hours where you can just fully turn inward and know that you're not going to be distracted or disturbed. All right, so now that we've talked about boundaries about personal space and taking time for yourself, let's talk about boundaries around your emotional well-being. Now, when it comes to emotional well-being, I feel like there's three categories that we can touch on. One is establishing clear communication. The second one is around your self-care and your emotional energy. And the third one is around creating a safe environment, a safe space for yourself. So when we're talking about establishing clear and open communication, again, how we communicate as introverts is very different. So we need to be able to honor that within a relationship so that we have open communication. And if you have open communication and you feel like you can communicate in the way that works for you, it's going to facilitate having these conversations about boundaries. It's going to ensure that you feel heard when issues come up and they need to be talked through. And even if it's just like end of the day talking about how your day has gone, it's going to ensure that you don't feel overtalked or dismissed. So it's really important. But it can, as an introvert, feel really challenging to have those conversations, because a lot of times we may feel like we're not going to be understood, or we may feel like we're going to hurt somebody's feelings if we tell them that we need more time by ourselves or on our own. So it can be really, really hard to speak up and have those conversations. But it's super important, because it's just going to facilitate a stronger relationship when you can have those, when you can share what's not working for you and why, and then create a mutual foundation of respect where you can have that space to take care of your health and well-being. So some examples that you might want to put in place for boundaries, kind of touched on these a little bit earlier when it comes to communication, is ensuring that you have those quiet pauses when you're talking with someone so that you can gather your thoughts and continue with what you're saying, as opposed to somebody like, oh, you stopped talking, let me jump in and start talking. And you're like, wait a minute, I wasn't done with what I was saying, and then you can never get back to that point. So just ensuring that you have that space, and maybe you want to put a boundary in of like, I will let you know when I've completed my thought, so they know when they can jump in. Another idea for a boundary that you might want to establish around the idea of communication is setting up a way to communicate in a way that might be better for you. A lot of introverts are more comfortable writing things out, especially if there's a potential of there being conflict or a difficult conversation. So maybe that's a situation where if your partner or your boss or your friends or your family members are open to it, maybe if it's something that's difficult or could potentially be a source of conflict, that you write it all out first. Maybe that's just writing it out to get it out of your own head so that you're ready to talk, or maybe it can be, and the conversation can initially start with you providing them with, a letter or something like that. So that way you're able to fully express yourself. Okay, the second one, when we're talking about self-care and emotional energy, this kind of overlaps with what I talked about with having that space for alone time and solo time. I'm just mentioning that again because that's such a key area where introverts need boundaries. But in addition to that, when it comes to your energy and your self-care, I mentioned earlier that introverts have a heightened sensitivity to external stimuli. So things like noise, lots of activity, lots of people. So we are not only sensitive to the physical things when it comes to external stimuli, we're also really sensitive to emotions. So we're not only sensitive to our own emotions, but we tend to be pretty sensitive to other people's emotions. We're really good at being able to pick up those subtle cues, and that can also be very draining for us. So when it comes to, setting boundaries around emotional well-being and your self-care, this is all about avoiding emotional exhaustion, right? So some examples of some boundaries that you might want to implement here is, since we are really good listeners, it's very common for people to seek us out to unload, right? Like they will, here's all the things that's not working in my life. Here's what's awful. And while that's actually an honor that we can provide that space for the people in our lives, for them to feel like they can share with us and fully unload and feel seen and heard, it can be exhausting for us. So that might be an area, if you've experienced that, that might be an area where you want to set a boundary around that. And that could be around how much people can unload on you. So like how long, or it could be tied to your energy levels. So let's say, for example, your energetic battery, if it's like a 1 to 10 scale, maybe if you're above a 7, then you're open for business. Like, it's fine. Anybody, if you want to unload on me, that's fine. I've got the energy. I can be here for you. But if you're like under maybe a 4, a 3 or 4, that might not be the best time, because you're not going to have the energy to hold that space for them. So that might be where you need to have a boundary. Like, I can't right now, but I would love to listen to you tomorrow, or something like that. If you're in between, like a 4 to 7, then maybe it's okay. Yes, I can listen, but I'm going to need to limit how much, maybe 15 minutes or, whatever works for you. But if you've had that clear communication and they're aware of that, you can actually weave that into the conversation. I was just talking with someone the other day, and she's an introvert. She has 2 introvert daughters, teenage daughters. And she was saying that, when one of her daughter's friends comes over to hang out, she will ask the daughter, my friend's daughter, she'll ask her, so where's your social battery today? And the introverted daughter will say, it's about a 6. And her friend will be like, oh, okay, so we've got like maybe 2 hours that we can hang out. And the daughter's like, yeah, that sounds about right. And the friend is perfectly fine with that. And I thought that was such an amazing thing. But it also shows that you can establish those type of boundaries in your relationships, any relationships. So there's mutual understanding. And again, that clear lines of communication. And then the third area when it comes to emotional well-being is creating safe spaces. So it's not just, the energetic spaces of people around us that tire us. Physical spaces are areas where we may need to put in boundaries as well. I mentioned earlier that introverts tend to like really calm spaces. That helps us to feel rejuvenated and refreshed. So it's really important to set some boundaries around having that space somewhere in your home. So it may not be that you're in a place where you can have an entire room to yourself. That's okay. If you can, that's awesome. Claim that and run with it. But it may be just having, your favorite chair in a corner. Or it may be having like this amazing bench that's out in your garden or something like that. But the boundary here is the space itself. So it's your space. And then to carry that further, the boundary would be when you're in that space, you're to be undisturbed. So you could set a time on that, or it's just whenever you're there and step away. But it's, again, just so you have that quiet, calm space that is yours. Because as introverts, we really need spaces where we feel safe and we feel comfortable and comforting, so that we can go to that space to be able to have that alone time and to recharge ourselves. All right, so I know we're getting close to time. We got a couple of more things that I want to talk about here. We've talked about boundaries around personal space and taking time for yourself. We've talked about boundaries for your emotional well-being. So I want to close things out with talking about boundaries around your social interactions and events, because this is really a big area. Introverts get a bad rap for people saying introverts don't like people or don't want to be around people. And that's not true. We just can't be around people as long as extroverts can. But we're still social beings. We're still humans, and we still do enjoy being around people. But we do need to have some boundaries in place so that we aren't inadvertently around too many people for too long, and then we end up on empty and we're drained. So this is really, really key to set these in place, especially if the people in your life that you spend the most time with are more on the extroverted side of things, because they're going to get their energy from being in really social environments around lots of people. And so they're not going to understand initially until you start communicating things that doesn't work as well for you. So this is really, really important to have those conversations so that your needs are respected and honored, because otherwise you're going to end up just drained all the time. And the goal here is balance. So the goal isn't to forever say, I'm never going to go to a big party again, or I'm never going to go to a concert, or I'm never going to do what you enjoy doing because it's too overwhelming for you. That's not the goal. Just like it shouldn't be the goal that you have to go along with all the extroverted loud things. The goal is balance, so that both people are able to, you're both able to enjoy each other and things that each person enjoys, but you're also able to enjoy what you need in terms of being able to recharge and feel refreshed. So some examples of boundaries that you might need here is a limit on the number of larger, draining, emotionally, energetically draining events that you might attend, whether it's per month or maybe it's per season, like maybe during the holidays or something like that. I had a client once who her husband loved concerts, and while she loved concerts too, going every single month was very draining for her. So she ended up establishing a boundary with her husband that she could really only go to about maybe 2 to 3 concerts a year. And she let him decide, which ones do you want me to be at? And those are the ones that I'll go to. So that he was able to have a part in deciding which ones he really wanted to experience with her, but she was able to have the space to have that. Actually, that gave her time alone at home while he was out at some of the concerts. So when it comes to communicating your boundaries around these social interactions and social events, this is so that you're preventing feeling resentment at being stuck at events for far too long or far too often where you feel awkward and drained, right? So this is allowing each person in whatever the relationship is to feel, or to have their needs understood and their limitations understood, okay? So with all of that in mind, I know I just said a whole bunch of stuff. There is a replay available of this just in case you want to go back and listen to it. But just to recap, what I talked about here tonight is the unique traits and needs that introverts have within relationships. I talked about setting boundaries for the various areas to protect those needs and unique traits within relationships. We talked about setting boundaries for personal space and alone time. We talked about boundaries for your emotional well-being and self-care. And then we close things out by talking about boundaries for getting out of the house and being involved in like social interactions and events. So next week, I'm going to carry this conversation forward and we're going to complete this 3-part series. And I'm going to be talking about how to actually start communicating these boundaries. So if you are playing around with this and you're starting to explore where you might need boundaries, next week I'm going to be talking about how to actually start communicating those in your life and with the people in your life. So that's going to be next week, next Thursday at the same time. So be on the lookout for the invite for that. And if this is something that you struggle with, if this is something that you need support with, then I have started opening up some free coaching sessions. I just started doing this last week and I've had a few this week and they've been so awesome. But if you are struggling to set boundaries, or even if it's not about boundaries, if you're an introvert that's struggling with your confidence, if you were struggling with stepping out of your comfort zone, these are all areas that I work with my clients on. And I would love to have a free session with you to help you with those. So this is the link. You can go, you can go there, you can grab your session. And I would love, love, love to help you with this. If these are things that you're struggling with, I highly recommend that you grab one of these spots. So with that said, I think we're all done here. That's all I've got to say for today's part. So if there are any questions, I will open it up for you to ask any questions that you might have. You can drop those in the comments. And while you guys, if you're thinking of writing anything in, I'm just going to drop the link here to grab your free coaching session. All right. All right, so not seeing any questions coming in, and that is thank you, David. I'm so glad this was really helpful and eye-opening. If anyone thinks of any questions later, feel free to send me a message. You can either leave a comment on this, you can send me a direct message, because it might be something that you don't want, might be a question you don't want everybody seeing. So that is perfectly fine. You want to send me a DM. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully I will see you next week for part 3. Have a lovely evening.